There's a capital in the Middle East that's changed governments faster than it's changed geography: Damascus, one of the oldest cities on Earth, a city that's been conquered, rebuilt, and ruled by dozens of powers across 3,000 years. And every single one of them faced the same problem. The capital is in the southwest, the oil is in the northeast. The coast faces a different world entirely, and the borders that define modern Syria were drawn by European diplomats who never intended to create one unified country. They intended to create two competing ones. That decision was made in 1916. Syria is still paying for it. Assad fell. A new government arrived. Ministers were appointed. Deals were announced. And the map shown on television started looking like one country again. But the map on the ground never changed, because Syria's problem is not who sits in Damascus. It's that Damascus has always tried to govern a country whose edges face different worlds, and the edges have never fully agreed to be governed. The center of Syria can change in days. The edges take decades. And it's the edges that decide whether Syria is one country or four. Look at the map and the problem becomes obvious. Damascus sits in the southwest, tucked close to Lebanon, Jordan, and the road toward the Golan Heights. From there, the country stretches in every direction, across terrain that becomes more difficult and more contested the farther you travel from the capital. To the northeast, deserts, river systems, oil fields, and the Iraqi border. To the north, 911 kilometers of frontier with Turkey. To the south, Israel, the Golan Heights, and the most watched military border in the Middle East. To the west, the Mediterranean coast, Syria's only ports, and the mountain terrain that sheltered the old regime for 50 years. Each of these edges now has a different outside power, armed faction, or economic gravity pulling against the center. Damascus can appoint governors. It can issue decrees. It can announce integration agreements. But none of that automatically moves the edges, and Syria's future will not be settled in the capital. It will be settled at four edges the state has never fully controlled. The northeast is where Syria's economic weight actually lives. The region holds the Omar oil field, the Konoko gas facility, the main dams on the Euphrates River, and the border crossings into Iraq. For years, it functioned almost as a separate state. Its own armed forces, its own administration, its own relationships with the United States and with Kurdish political structures that stretch across multiple countries. The Euphrates runs through it like a boundary. West of the river, Damascus can project authority with some consistency. East of it, the terrain opens toward Iraq. Tribal networks, American military positions, Kurdish forces, and economic systems that developed independently of anything Damascus built. The SDF controls much of this territory. The oil fields sit largely east of the river. The dams sit on the river itself. The border crossings into Iraq sit further out still. To reunify Syria, Damascus needs all three. And getting all three means absorbing a region that spent years building parallel institutions. With outside backing that does not dissolve because a cabinet was formed 600 kilometers away in the capital. Until Damascus controls the river, the oil, and the border, Syria's reunification is an announcement, not a reality. The north is where Syria's fracture stops being internal. Turkey shares 911 kilometers of border with Syria. For Ankara, that line is not a foreign frontier. It's a security perimeter. Kurdish armed movements, refugee flows, and militant networks have crossed it in both directions for years. Turkey does not view northern Syria the way Damascus does. Damascus sees sovereign territory. Ankara sees a threat corridor it intends to manage regardless of who governs the capital. Turkey currently maintains military positions inside Syrian territory. It backs armed factions controlling significant portions of the north. And it has stated clearly and repeatedly that Kurdish armed forces near its border are a line it will enforce with or without Damascus's permission. This creates a problem Damascus cannot solve alone. Even if the new government wants to restore control in the north, moving forces toward the Turkish border immediately triggers Ankara's response. Even if Kurdish factions sign integration agreements with the Syrian state, Turkey still watches every movement through its own security logic. Even if local administrations agree to deal with Damascus, the armed geography remains. Roads, positions, buffer zones, and foreign-backed militias that exist independently of whatever the capital announces. Syria's northern border does not end the conflict. It keeps importing Turkey's security fears directly into Syrian territory. And that problem has no solution Damascus can implement by itself. The south looks manageable on a map. It sits close to the capital. The distances are short. Control should be straightforward. It isn't. The south faces Israel, Jordan, the Golan Heights, and the Druze communities of Suwaida. And that combination makes every movement here carry weight far beyond its immediate context. A Syrian military convoy moving south is not simply a domestic deployment. It's a signal to Israel's northern command. A security operation near Quneitra does not stay local. It touches a frontier Israel has occupied since 1967 and struck repeatedly since the transition in Damascus. A crisis in Suwaida is not only a communal dispute, it draws in Israel's buffer calculations, Jordan's stability concerns, and Damascus's fear of losing authority close to home. Since Assad's fall, Israel has expanded its military presence beyond the 1974 disengagement line into new terrain in the south. That is not a temporary adjustment. It's geographic repositioning that Damascus cannot reverse without a confrontation it's nowhere near ready to have. So the closer Damascus gets to restoring control near the Golan, the faster its internal politics collide with forces operating on entirely different logic, and the less room the new government has to move. The coast is the most politically sensitive edge of Syria. It holds Latakia, Tartus, Syria's only Mediterranean ports, and the mountain terrain that gave the old regime its defensive depth for decades. It also holds something else. Russia's only Mediterranean naval base, maintained at Tartus since 1971, sits on Syria's coast. Moscow has no intention of leaving regardless of what happens in Damascus. As long as Russian naval assets remain there, the coast is not simply Syrian territory. It's layered with a great power interest that no Syrian government can remove, and that any new leadership must navigate around. Beyond Russia, the coast is the old regime's heartland. The Alawite communities there provided Assad's government with its deepest military networks for 50 years. Those networks do not dissolve because the capital changed hands. The mountains offer natural defensive depth. The ports carry real economic importance, and the communities carry memory, fear, and grievance that political announcements can't resolve. For the new government, controlling the coast means controlling Syria's access to the sea. It also means managing communities that distrust what came after Assad, in terrain that's always resisted outside authority. Whoever controls Damascus may lead Syria. Whoever stabilizes the coast will decide whether the old Syria is truly finished or simply waiting. Syria is not fracturing because one agreement collapsed or one deal was broken. It's fracturing because every edge of the country pulls toward a different gravity, and always has. The northeast pulls toward oil, the Euphrates, Kurdish political structures, and Iraq. The north pulls toward Turkey's security demands, and the buffer zone Ankara will not surrender. The south pulls toward Israel, the Golan, and the limits of what Damascus can do near its most watched frontier. The coast pulls toward Russia, the Mediterranean, and the networks the old regime built over half a century. Damascus sits in the middle, trying to pull all of it back into one state. And that is the real challenge. Not forming a cabinet, not replacing governors, not announcing deals. Those are just the beginning, not the solution. Syria's map does not reward symbolic control. It rewards control over edges, borders, rivers, ports, oil fields, mountains, buffer zones. The center changes faster than the periphery. The capital moves faster than the country, and a state can return on paper long before it returns on the ground. So when people say Syria is being reunified, just look at the edges. Look at who controls the oil fields east of the Euphrates. Look at the Turkish military positions along 911 kilometers of northern border. Look at the Israeli footprint expanding south of Damascus. Look at Tartus and the Russian flag that's flown there since 1971. That is where Syria's future will actually be decided, because Damascus can win the capital and still lose the country.